This is an update on the broadleaf evergreens in my evergreen collection. And in case you don't know, a broadleaf evergreen is a tree or bush that keeps its leaves all year round, even in the wintertime. And it's called broadleaf because these are not conifers with needles. These are actual trees and bushes that have leaves, broad leaves. So I'm going to let you know how they've been doing here in Middle Tennessee, which is growing zone 7A. And that means basically it gets pretty hot here in the summer in the 90s. And in the winter it can get fairly cold, even down to below zero. So that's asking a lot of a tree to keep its leaves all year round in those growing conditions, because it has to resist the heat and the cold and the dry and the wet. So here we go, starting off with one of these star performers. The common name is Ocala Anise, and the Latin name is Illicium parviflorum, native to central Florida, but surprisingly it does very well here in central Tennessee, even performing extremely well when the temperature dropped to -4 Fahrenheit. And that's kind of a recurring theme with North American evergreens, is that they have a lot of latent cold hardiness that you wouldn't expect based on where they grow normally. A lot of that has to do with how species were forced south during the last ice age, and then maybe the bug or bird or rodent that spread the seeds in the past might have gone extinct or wasn't able to spread the species back north, but the species retains its ability to survive pretty cold temps. So this is the perfect example of that concept, because you wouldn't expect a tree or a bush that only grows around Orlando to survive -4 Fahrenheit, but it actually survived even though conifers and other broadleaf evergreens from northern climates failed. So it's extremely cold tolerant, the Illicium parviflorum. So I spent a lot of time on that one because it deserves it. This is one of the stars. Moving on. I have a lot of hollies in my collection, and this is one. It's the Centennial Girl Holly, and I believe this is a hybrid between a couple of Chinese species of holly. Ilex centrochinensis is one. Actually, the other one might not be Chinese. It might be Ilex aquifolium. But this one was frozen back to the ground when it hit -4, and it has since resprouted and started to go vertical again. So I'm going to leave it here, see what it does, but I really like the dark green color and the glossy leaves of the Centennial Girl Holly. Just be aware though, it's not as cold hardy as some other hollies. You see English laurel planted everywhere around foundations in front of houses, but this is not English laurel, this is Portuguese laurel, prunus lisitanica. And I was a little worried about it because some of the tips were burned by the cold. You can see there and right there, but it's put on fairly vigorous growth so far this year, so I am favorable towards Portuguese laurel. It's relatively rare, but if you want to try one in Middle Tennessee, it's probably worth it. Right behind that we have the Silverthorn, elaeagnus pungens. Sometimes you can find this at Lowe's. I think this one might have come from Lowe's. And this is just another broadleaf evergreen tree, small tree to bush. Has silvery foliage, actually comes out looking kind of tan, and the undersides of the leaves are white, so that's interesting too. And it has done well in the cold and the heat. And then next to that I have another evergreen tree. It doesn't look like it would be evergreen, but it is. It is pyracantha. This is Pyracantha coccinea, otherwise known as Firethorn, and this is the Yukon Bell cultivar. Kind of crazy in the way it grows. It's somewhat spreading along the ground here, but also has a vertical component, which I've had to stake up because it's not really that stable. And you can see it gets these berries. These will turn bright orange or red later on in the year and remain most of the winter where birds will try to eat them. So right here, this one little planting has several different species of broadleaf evergreen, and you can see they look great here in the spring, but they will remain green even throughout the winter. Here's a viburnum, probably the most cold hardy viburnum you can grow. It is the Prague viburnum, which is a hybrid between Viburnum rhytidophyllum and Viburnum utile. two Chinese species of viburnum, and it's very cold hardy. Survived -4. It has these, I guess, kind of ribbed or veined leaves, kind of sparse leaf growth, and I'm training it. You can see I've got a stake here. I'm training it to be vertical, and the underside is white. Behind that, I have another holly. This is the Dahoon holly, native to the southeastern U.S. Ilex cassine is the Latin name, and I purchased this, I believe, from shop.arborday.org. I don't know if they have them anymore, but this is interesting because it doesn't really have spines like you would expect for a holly, and it has these narrow leaves. This may in fact be the myrtifolia cultivar of Ilex cassine, but I have been very favorable about this species, and I really like it for Middle Tennessee. Here's a small holly. It's the Castle Wall holly, and I believe this one may be a what you call a blue holly, which would be a combination of Ilex aquifolium and Ilex rugosa. Fairly cold tolerant. I'm not sure about the heat tolerance. Seems to be doing all right, and it's relatively small, it looks like, and slow growing. Castle Wall holly. Here's a magnolia. This is the Little Gem Magnolia. Magnolia grandiflora, southern magnolia. There are several different cultivars. The Little Gem is notable for its smaller leaf size, and you can see on the underside it has the characteristic brown fuzz. And right behind that, I have just planted these two recently. I have the D.D. Blanchard, which has larger leaves, also Magnolia grandiflora, and it's doing pretty well. The magnolia grows pretty much everywhere here in Middle Tennessee, so you see a lot of them. And the other thing you see a lot of in Middle Tennessee is this Nellie Stevens Holly. Looking good. I believe this is a cross between Ilex aquifolium and Ilex cornuta. So these grow everywhere, and they grow huge here in Middle Tennessee. This one is putting on impressive growth. Here we have Agarista populifolia. I actually don't know the common name for this, but it is a native to the southeastern U.S., another broadleaf evergreen forming a small tree or bush, and it's related to the leucothues, I believe. And so I just planted this one this spring, and it's already putting on new growth here. You can see the new growth comes out kind of a pale orange and then slowly turns to a light green. And I'm looking forward to seeing how cold hardy Agarista populifolia will be in the winter. And this one is commonly marketed as Cleyera, but it's really ternsrtoemia gymnanthera. This is the Bigfoot cultivar, and so far doing well, putting on new growth. And I did have one of these in the ground before when it was dropped to -4 and it was killed, but I wanted to try it again. I think I had a different cultivar last time, so I'm going to try this, see what it does. It's a really cool looking broadleaf evergreen. It has these kind of oval shaped leaves, and they turn to dark green, as you can see on the older foliage there. In theory, this can also become fairly tall, so let's see what Cleyera does. And right next to that, I have a native evergreen. This actually grows native in Middle Tennessee. This is the mountain laurel, Columella latifolia, a very small specimen that I ordered from woodlanders.com. So I'm going to be curious to see how quickly that can grow over the years. Here's another North American native holly. This is the Inkberry Holly, Ilex glabra. This particular cultivar is the densa cultivar, but I do have some regular plain old Ilex glabra. This is going to be extremely cold hardy with relatively small leaves, and eventually gets black colored berries on it. That's why it's called Inkberry. But this would be an extremely adaptable holly, and given a lot of different growing conditions, I would say if you're growing hollies, you need to add an Ilex glabra to your collection because it's just such a good, strong addition. Very resilient. And here's a sweet bay magnolia. This is Magnolia virginiana, the other species of evergreen magnolia native to the southeastern U.S. There's one here with kind of pointed leaves, and then I have another one back here with the more typical rounded leaf configuration. And you can see there's the fruit. It has already flowered, and it'll form a small, kind of like looks like a seed cone, but I guess it's more of a seed pod. This one is growing very rapidly and very tall, and you can see they have the underside of the leaf is kind of white, so it looks pretty interesting when it blows in the wind. Kind of looks like a white-leafed tree, but extremely fast-growing, tolerant of moisture in the soil, so if you have a wetter spot, the Sweet Bay Magnolia would be a better choice than the regular Southern Magnolia. The flowers are smaller, but they are still pretty fragrant. And here is another Illicium. This is the Florida Anise, Illicium floridanum, and it's in the same genus as the first tree that I showed you and went on and on about. This one is also very cold hardy, and I have seen it do pretty well last year at 4 degrees, positive 4 degrees Fahrenheit, and I have a feeling it could go even colder than that. So another interesting tree, and if you're growing broadleaf evergreens, the Illiciums are such a great option, but very underutilized. And this is Pieris japonica, also known as Andromeda is the common name, I believe, from Japan. And you can see the new growth is kind of this red color, but eventually it gets these nice green, slightly serrated leaves. Pretty cold hardy. This was in the ground at 4 degrees positive, 4 degrees Fahrenheit. And this is the Dorothy Wycoff cultivar. There's several different ones, but I believe Dorothy Wycoff is the most cold hardy. Alright, this is the wheel tree, Rhododendron Sp, a fairly slow-growing, fairly rare broadleaf evergreen. I did have one in the ground when it hit -4, and even though it dropped all the leaves, the buds did resprout, so that was a big surprise. And last winter it did pretty good at +4 Fahrenheit, so it's definitely cold hardy, and it can definitely resprout if it loses all of its leaves, and the stems were cold hardy, so that's good news, more than I can say for a lot of other things that were in the ground. So if you can find it, Rhododendron Sp is a great choice for Middle Tennessee, but very slow growing. This is a rhododendron. I don't actually know which species this is. I think I may have lost the tag on this one, but there's so many different rhododendrons it's hard to keep track of, and it hardly even really matters which species it is because they're all about the same. I don't know which one this is, as I said, but rhododendron is a little bit tricky to grow. You need ideal growing conditions, acidic soil, which I don't really have. My soil is more on the alkaline side, and well-draining soil, which I could have if I planted it just right. But I planted this one more as an experiment, and it did survive extreme cold, -4 and +4, so rhododendron is a great option in shadier spots, and I have this one planted at the very back of my collection where it gets more shade than normal. Here's a very small specimen. This is Leucothoi fontanesiana. I have it growing in a fairly shady spot here, and you can find Leucothoi every now and then at stores. I believe this one came from Lowe's, and it's a low-growing, slow-growing broadleaf evergreen that did survive extreme cold. Here is another Leucothoi. This one is faster growing than the fontanesiana. This is Leucothoi axillaris. Common name is coastal Doghobble, and this one has also done very well in the cold and kept its leaves. There's the older leaves from the winter, and the new leaves start off this kind of bronze color and then turn a medium green before they eventually turn into this extremely dark green. And this is kind of an experimental one, but so far it has done very well in a shady spot. Here's a quick shot of the flower on the Sweet Bay Magnolia. Magnolia virginiana. There's an open one. There's one that's getting ready to open. There's one that's just starting to open. So again, Sweet Bay Magnolia, if you're not growing that in Middle Tennessee, you're definitely missing out on a really good broadleaf evergreen tree. Here's an Osmanthus heterophylla. This is the Sasaba cultivar, otherwise known as the Sasaba osmanthus. It has these pointy, kind of ivy-shaped leaves. They eventually become this nice dark green with a white waxy color that gives them kind of even a bluish green color. but they start off medium green. Just put this in the ground, and so far it's putting on new growth, which is good news. It's probably not that fast growing, but it is going to be cold hardy since it is Osmanthus heterophylla. And this is another cold hardy holly from East Asia, Ilex pedunculosa, or long stalk holly. And it's put on a ton of new growth. There's what the old growth leaf looks like, but there's so much bright green new growth this year. This is the blue prince holly, and that's going to be a hybrid between Ilex equifolium and Ilex rugosa, one of the typical blue hollies, and dark green and glossy leaves. This one will be extremely cold hardy, but relatively slow growing. This is a Liberty holly, which I believe is mostly Ilex latifolia with a few other things mixed in, like Ilex cornuta and Ilex pernii. Those are all Chinese species of holly, and this one has a history of being frozen pretty severely and then resprouting from the stump. You can see yeah, there's a lot of regrowth here. Even this past winter, part of it was frozen and it's just resprouted. So I'm leaving it here just to see what it can do, but Liberty holly is not a great choice for Middle Tennessee. Here's another magnolia. This is the Edith Bogue cultivar of Magnolia grandiflora, and it's putting on prolific new growth. So definitely the most cold hardy cultivar, but that's really not usually too much of a concern here in Middle Tennessee. But it was in the ground when it hit -4 and did just fine. Here's another holly, Ilex vomitoria. This is from the southeastern US, and you usually find it in the deep south, but it did survive extreme cold. It did just fine at 4 degrees positive Fahrenheit this past winter, and it's put on a ton of new growth since then. So if you can find Yopon holly is the common name, Ilex vomitoria, I say it's a good choice. Small leaves and pretty fast growth. This is the blue maid holly, another one of those blue hollies with the aquifolium and rugosa species mixed. Fairly slow growing, but extremely cold tolerant. And here is yet another hybrid holly, the Savannah holly, which is a combination of two North American holly species, Ilex opaca and Ilex cassine. Very cold tolerant and very fast growth. So far, the Savannah holly has proven to be a robust holly choice for Middle Tennessee. Here is a somewhat experimental planting. This is the gallberry holly, or Ilex coriaceae, which is native to, I guess, the Florida Panhandle and Gulf coastal regions like that. But I'm going to see if it can survive here in Middle Tennessee. Kind of an experiment. Here we have the southern wax myrtle, Myrica cerifera, a fairly fast-growing bush that also is marginally cold tolerant. You can see last winter's leaves are still hanging on, but they're definitely brown, and that's because it got down to 4 degrees Fahrenheit. The winter before that, it got to -4 and all the leaves fell off, but new growth resprouted. And new growth has also resprouted so far this year, so I think it can tolerate being a deciduous tree if it loses its leaves every year, it seems. But I'm not sure if we had a normal winter where it usually only gets down to the teens if that foliage would turn brown. So I'm waiting to see a normal winter without extreme cold snaps. But so far, I would say that Myrica cerifera, southern wax myrtle, is still a good choice for Middle Tennessee. The only thing you have to watch out for is maybe trim it so that it doesn't grow out of control and allow it to thicken the trunk, because supposedly the wood is very weak and susceptible to ice damage. And here's another laurel. This one is also native to North America. This is the Carolina laurel, and it is Prunus caroliniana. It has been putting on vigorous growth. Unlike a lot of laurels that tend to have a bushy structure, this one is growing pretty vertical, and it's going to become a tree for sure. So I really love this tree, and I planted another one. Prunus caroliniana is a fantastic choice for Middle Tennessee and probably underutilized in the landscaping trade at present, although I think it's becoming more popular. This is Ilex glabra again. I wanted to show you the non-densa cultivar. You can see the leaves are slightly larger, but still it's not a very fast growing holly. This is the Christmas Jewel Holly. I believe this is a cultivar of Ilex cornuta with smaller leaves and dark green foliage. A great choice for a not so fast growing holly. Still looks great though. I always wanted the Christmas Jewel Holly and I'm glad I found it at Lowe's one time. Another hybrid holly. This one is also Ilex opaca and Ilex cassine. This is the Foster's No. 2 holly. And you see these growing everywhere here in Middle Tennessee as small to medium-sized trees. This is going to be just about as cold hardy as a holly can be, and has a very good vertical tree type growth form. So if you're looking for an evergreen tree, Foster's holly is a great choice. Another holly, Oakland holly. I can't remember exactly which species are in this, although I think it may have some Ilex cornuta. I believe it's a mixture of Chinese species. And you see Oakland holly everywhere at Home Depot and Lowe's. And so far it's done pretty well. It did good at 4 degrees Fahrenheit. So that's a check the box in its favor. And it definitely has really cool foliage and relatively fast growth rate. This is the Dragon Lady Holly, Ilex aquifolium and Ilex perni. So that's English holly with Chinese holly, dark green foliage, as you can see, very glossy. It was severely frozen when it hit -4, but it handled +4 fairly well. And during a normal Middle Tennessee winter where the lows typically only get to the teens, then I would say it would do very well. So I think Dragon Lady Holly is a good choice for Middle Tennessee. And this is the straight species American Holly, Ilex opaca. Also growing well, no doubts about cold hardiness here. It is one of the most cold hardy hollies in the world, and it's growing fairly well in a partially shaded location. One more look at the Dahoon holly, Ilex cassine. You can see it has the small inconspicuous white flowers there, and overall the growth is fairly vigorous with the oblong narrow needles and the reddish colored growth at the tips, which eventually matures into a medium green. Again, Dahoon holly, a great choice, fairly uncommon for an evergreen tree in Middle Tennessee. This is an experimental planting here, the Swamp TT Cyrema racemiflora from the extreme deep south. Actually not extreme, it does go into Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, South Carolina, so pretty experimental. It's supposed to be semi-evergreen. It loses some leaves and keeps some in the winter, so we'll see what it loses and what it keeps. I have it planted in a fairly protected site, but this could be, if I'm lucky, another good evergreen choice. So maybe wait a few years and see how this one survived or died before you decide to buy your own. But right now I'm taking a chance on Cyrella racemiflora. This is the China Boy Holly, so far growing as a bush. You can find these at Lowe's or Home Depot usually. A combination of Ilex cornuta and Ilex rugosa, so very cold hardy because of the rugosa, but so far not that fast growing. We'll see what it does as time progresses. Here's another experimental planting. This is the Persea palustris, or swamp bay, and native once again to the southeastern US, and it does grow in the southeast in coastal areas, but I'm attempting it here in Middle Tennessee just to see what it can do. It had a little browning and spotting last winter when it dropped to 4 degrees, but as you can see, those leaves did survive and it's put on new growth since then. And here's a very experimental specimen, the Loblolly Bay, Gordonia lasianthus. It did survive the winter and it's put on some new growth, but it's not that vigorous, so we'll see what happens. One more Cleyera here. I believe this one may be the liane cultivar of ternsrtoemia gymnanthera. And I just want to point out that there is a species of broadleaf evergreen that actually is Cleyera japonica. And I tried one a couple years ago and it was killed by the cold, so I think you might not even want to get the real Cleyera, even though a nursery that I bought this from assured me it was Cleyera japonica. It's obviously not, now that I see the new growth. It is ternsrtoemia, but I'm not really that mad about it because I think ternsrtoemia is slightly more cold tolerant than the real Cleyera japonica. It definitely has really good glossy dark green foliage, and the new growth comes out this reddish orange color. I don't have this in the ground yet, but I wanted to show you what I'm going to be planting soon. This is a barberry. A Berberis is the genus, and it's actually a hybrid between two Chinese species of barberry. I believe one is Berberis gagnepani and the other is Berberis verruculosa, but the trade name in the horticultural trade is William Penn barberry. And I believe you can find this online if you search for it. And I'm really curious to see how barberry will do in difficult growing conditions. I have an area with armillaria fungus in the ground, and I'm searching for species that can be resistant to that. And I think that the Berberis genus in general is very resistant. And so as you can see, it's also spiny, so that's a good thing too. Resistant to munching and crunching. So let's see what barberry does. But it's a great choice for a spiny shrub if you're looking for one.